Okay, what we're going to take a look at next is giving the users the ability to select their main photo inside their collection of photos when they're editing their photos. So we'll start off in the API, and I'll close all of these down. And what we want to do here is go to our users controller, and what we're really doing in this case, when we're updating something, we want to use the HTTP put. So let's just find the right place. We want to be under this blue bracket where we're adding our HTTP post, and what we'll do is we'll add an HTTP put and we'll give it a root of set-main-photo, and we'll say / and what we'll pass into this is the photo ID as a root parameter. So we'll say public async task, and when we're updating a resource, remember we don't need to pass the object back, so we'll say action result, and then we'll say set main photo, and we'll take the int of the photo ID in this case. So what we need to do is get hold of our user, so we'll say var user equals await, and then we can say user repository, and we can say get by username async, and then we can pass in our user.getUsername method to go and get our user. And remember, when we're doing this with any of these methods, when we're getting our username from our token, this means we're validating that this is the user that they say they are. We can trust the information inside the token. There's no trickery going on there because our servers signed the token. The users sent us the token. If they're saying their name is Lisa, then we're going to trust that that's correct. So they're authenticating, and we're going to get this user that is authenticating to this method. And then what we'll do is we'll get hold of the photo that matches this specific ID. So we'll say var photo equals user.photos. And also remember that this particular method that we get from our repository has an eager loading property for the user's photos collection. So we do have access to the photos inside here. And we'll say first or default. And this is not asynchronous because we've already got the user in memory at this point. So we're not going to the database now. We've already done that inside our repository. And what we'll do is we'll look for the photo with the ID that matches the photo ID we're getting from our parameter here. So we'll add a check here to make sure the user's not trying to set a photo that is main to main. So if somehow they manage to do that, which we will of course prevent them from doing on the client, then we'll return a bad request, and we'll say this is already your main photo. But we won't give them the opportunity to actually do that in the client anyway. And if they get past this, then what we need to do is get hold of the current main photo and make that is main property and set that to false, and update this photo that they're passing in and set that one to true. So what we'll do is we'll say var current main, and we'll say equals user.photos, and we'll use first or default again, and we'll say x goes to x.isMain, and this will give us the current main photo. And I'm trying to think of occasions where this could be null. I can't think of anything, but we'll add the check anyway, and we'll say if the current main is not equal to null, then we're going to say the current main is main and set that equal to true. And we'll also set the photo that we're passing in, the one that we're trying to set to main, we'll set that one is main is true. And obviously, I said if this one's true, then this one has to be false rather than true. We want to turn off the current main and turn on the new one that they've just set to that. And then what we need to do is just save our changes back to the repository. So we'll say await user repository save all async. And what we return from an update is no content. We don't need to send anything back in this request. And just in case we get this far and something went wrong, then we'll return a bad request and we'll just say failed to set main photo. And that's what we need for this particular functionality. Fairly straightforward. We just need to turn one main photo off and turn the other one on. That's all we really need to do. So let's go test this in Postman. And what we'll do is we'll just get the currently logged in user. Now I'm logged in as Lisa in Postman, so I'm going to click on send. And let's take a look at the photos that we have to work with. So we've got the ID of 1, and that's the one that's currently set to main. And all of the other ones, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, are all set to false. So what we're going to do is try and set photo with the ID of 11 to the main photo. And of course, what we would want to see then is when we make this request again, we would want to see this one set to false. So let's give this a go. And I'll click on the set main photo request. Double check we've got the authorization header in there, and we do, and I'll click on send. And we get the 204 no content, so that means it's been successful. And if we go and get our user by username and scroll down, we can see the photo with the ID of 1 is now false, and we can see the one with the ID of 11 is true. And if we try and set the main photo again, even though we know this is the main photo, and click send, then we get this is already your main photo. Perfect. Now what we'll do next is take a look at setting this up on the client side. Okay, before we implement the setting of main photo on the client side, there's a small detour I just want to take. And what we want to do, just to give us something else to think about when we are setting the main photo, is actually displays the user's photo in the navbar, or at least their main profile photo. So what we'll do is we'll stick with the API first of all, and what we're going to do here is return the user's main photo along with their user object. And what we're going to do is return the user's photo with their user object in here. So what we'll do is we'll open up the user DTO first of all, and what we want to do here is just add an additional property, and it's going to be a string, and we're going to set this to their photo URL. And this is of course going to be their main photo. And what we'll do is we'll go to our account controller, and what we'll need to do is when they log in, because when they register, then they're not going to have this photo at this point. So we don't need to do anything for the register method, but in the login method, what we can do is we can also return the photo URL. And what we're going to set this to is user.photos.firstOrDefault, and using system.link, and then we'll just say x goes to x.isMain, and then we'll get the URL property from this. And even though that they have registered, it doesn't mean they've got a photo, so we'll add the optional property there, so the photo URL will be null. So then what we'll do is we'll go to our user.ts inside the client, and we'll also add this property inside here. So we'll say photo URL, and that's going to be a type of string. And then what we'll do, we'll go across to our account service inside here, and let's take a look at what we're doing when we log in. So when we log in, we say this current user source .next. We've got a register method where we're doing the same thing. And let's tidy this up now, and instead of using or having local storage in multiple places where we set the item, I can't think of a good reason why we're not using this already. I'm sure I had a reason at the time, but whatever it is at this moment in time completely escapes me. So I'm going to take the local storage method and use this inside the set current user. And this is going to be where we set our current user source. And then instead of using that method here, we can just say this set current user, and we can pass in the user. And we can also do the same for the login, of course, as well. So instead of 2 lines, we'll just set this to 1 line. And I reserve the right to come and change my mind about this, because I'm convinced there was a reason for doing it that way in the first place, but I just can't think of it now. So anyway, we'll use this to set our current user, and when we get our user back from the API, obviously this is going to include their photo URL now as well. And then of course we're going to have access to that property inside here, and this is going to allow us to set the user's image in the navbar. So what we'll do, we'll head over to the navbar, and say nav component HTML. And inside the drop down, we want to do this. And just above the A tag for the welcome message, what we'll do is we'll just add an image in here and we'll give it the property of user.photo URL. And we'll just give it an alternate of user.username. And this needs to be inside brackets. And say user.username. And what we'll do is we'll just give this a tiny bit of styling as well. So we'll head over to the nav component CSS file. And inside here we'll add an image style. And we'll need to set the max height, otherwise it's going to take up way too much space on the navbar. So we'll set this to 50 pixels. We'll give it a border so it stands out from the background, and we'll give it 2 pixels, and we'll say solid, and we'll make the border white. So we'll use FFF, and then we'll use display in line so it aligns with the user on the navbar. So let's make sure this has actually worked. And what we'll need to do, because we only get this when we actually log in, so we're not displaying the photo at the moment, but if we log out and then log back in again, then we get an internal server error. Woohoo! We haven't seen one of these for a while. And this gives us an opportunity, a wonderful opportunity to troubleshoot a problem. So what's going on here? Now we get the line of code that's caused the problem, and in this case it's the account controller line 65. And in fact, what I'd suggest actually is you pause the video at this stage and see if you can work out what the problem is. And take the opportunity to throw the debugger at something if you like as well. And try and understand why we're getting a value cannot be null and parameter source inside here. We know what we're doing, we're logging in, we're going to the account controller, and this is an excellent opportunity to troubleshoot a problem where you don't know the full facts at the moment. So pause the video, and if you don't get it, don't worry, because what I'm going to do now is show you how you can go about solving this kind of problem. So we've got a starting point. We're going to head to our account controller on line 65. And let's see what's on line 65. Well, not surprisingly, this is where we're creating our new user. And what we've done here is said we're going to get this from the user.photos. And what we knew for sure before we made this change is that this wasn't causing us an exception. So let's take a look at what could cause us an exception in here. And if we hover the mouse over the first or default method, then we know it's going to return the first element of the sequence that satisfies a condition. But what we do have an issue with here, or what it tells us, is if the source is empty. Now the source in this case is the photos, and it's telling us if the source is empty or if no element passes the test specified by predicate, otherwise the first element in source that passes the test specified by predicate. But what we do get is what exceptions this particular method throws, and this one throws a system argument null exception. And we're going to get this exception if we don't have anything in the source. And the source is our photos. And why would this user object not have any photos? Well, our photos is our related entity. And if we take a look at what we're getting for our user, then inside our account controller, we're not using a repository here. What we're doing is we're injecting the data context into this. Now we're not going to change this policy. We're not going to go and add our user repository into this. This account controller is going to be updated later on when we use identity. But what we're not doing is returning the photos with this. And what we need to do is eagerly load our photos here. So what we'll do is we'll say include, and we'll say p goes to p.photos. And now we're going to have some photos when we try and execute our login method. And this source is no longer going to be empty. If the user doesn't have a photo, that will not cause an exception here, because it's simply going to return null. But if it doesn't have any photos to work with, that's when we see the exception. So what we should be able to do is let's just go back to the home page and just refresh. And let's try logging in again as Lisa with the password and press return. and this time we get success. Disappointingly, the CSS doesn't seem to have appeared for this because, like I said, if we didn't style it, we'd get some pretty big images. So what's gone wrong with the styling? Well, let's take a look. So we've got our image property, and this is an image tag, and inside our nav component I used an image class, and that needs to be the tag, and we don't have a period in front of this when we're targeting a HTML tag directly. So that will solve that problem, and let's go take a look. And now we can see our image next to our welcome message. It's a bit too close together, so I'm just going to go back and add a tiny bit more style. And in our A class, where we've already got some classes here, I'm just going to specify ml-2 and go back, take a look. And that's a bit more like it. We've got a bit of space between our image and our user. So what we'll do next is we'll allow the user to choose a main image. And the idea, obviously, of this is when we do update the image, we're going to want to see it update everywhere inside our application. And we'll take a look at that next.